if you have seen my tutorials before with my tier tray sets, you know that I like to paint by color versus piece by piece. You can do whatever you prefer. So since I go by color, I have already separated my pieces out. I have the blue, the red, these pieces are brown, and these ones are white. If you look at the picture that I posted on Facebook, I did a heavily distressed look. So you can customize yours, whether you want it very distressed or not. So if you want it to look more dirty and more distressed, then you're gonna wanna do this step. If you choose not to, sorry, I'm out in my garage and my dog just saw my son who just woke up. It's 11 a.m. So if you paint these white without doing this step, it's totally fine. But when you distress it, it's just not going to be as apparent because the wood is lighter underneath. So if you want it to really show up, then you're gonna want to stain this a darker brown so that when you distress it, it really pops. So again, this step is optional. So if you're not used to doing this kind of staining, go ahead and practice on these pieces since you're going to be covering them with white anyways before you go to the brown pieces, because the brown, it's going to matter because there's nothing that goes on top of that. So let's start with the popsicle. You're going to take your baby wipe and I wrap it around 2 fingers. Once you open your kit, if your baby wipe has dried out, all you have to do is like run some water on your hand and kind of squeeze it or spritz it with some water. You don't want it running because then you're gonna just make a mess. But it does need to be damp to help thin and spread that paint. So then I just lightly dip it into the brown paint. Then I rub the excess off onto the box that the kit came in or a spare piece of cardboard. And then all you're going to do is I go in the direction of the wood grain and I just go run it back and forth. Now again, these pieces that are on the, that you're going to be painting white on top, I try to make it as even as I can, but I'm also not going to worry about it looking perfect because you're just going to be covering it anyways. So since I'm going to be covering this, I'm going to leave it like this. I want it to look darker. Now, let me do versus a piece that will be seen. So you don't have to stain on the back of the fireworks stand. You don't need to stain this piece or this piece. You can, but you're just going to be covering them. You're not going to see any bit of it. You are going to see this side piece. So I'm just going to do this. Now for me personally, I want this to be lighter. So I'm going to take a clean end while the paint is still wet and I'm just going to wipe over it and that lightens it. If you want it darker, then wait till it dries and go back and do another coat. The more color you deposit, the darker it's going to get. So let's look at these pieces. I'm going to dip, rub off, and then direction of the wood grain, rubbed a little bit too much off. And I'm just gonna try to make sure that I'm keeping that color even. And that actually, from my eyes, I don't know what it looks like on the camera, that is super even. So I'm gonna lighten it just a bit. I'm not gonna press down too hard because I'm pretty happy with that end color. And then I'm going to set this aside into my brown pile and go to this next little piece. And I'm gonna work fairly quickly. I don't want it to dry at odd times. Now, if you plan on distressing the brown pieces too, then again, this does not matter because if you want it to kind of look scuffed up, then once you're done, you're just gonna sand over it. I did not sand the brown pieces on my kit, so that is up to you. Now, before I press pause, I'm just gonna tell you on these little pieces, just gently rub on them, you don't want them to break. So if you're like really pressing down and hammering on them and yanking them back and forth, they are going to break. The last thing I'm going to tell you before I press pause is there are two pieces that do have white in them. This is the bottom of the popsicle and this USA. I used the little detail brush to paint white and then to paint red. I did not stain brown behind those pieces. So if you decide you do want them stained brown, then I would just you could do the whole thing if you really wanted to. I don't 100% know how that will affect the red, but I felt like just having that with the stripe was enough distressing with the red. I felt like that looked just fine. So I am not doing that on mine. I am going to press pause, finish staining all these pieces brown, and then we'll come back for the next step. Okay, I thought I pressed record, but I guess it didn't start. So I said, set your brown pieces aside so they can dry completely, because although they feel dry to the touch already, they'll dry super quick. I don't want any brown to transfer into the white paint when you're painting them. So I'm gonna let those dry. I set the pieces that are only brown off to the other side so that I don't accidentally paint them white. The next step I'm gonna show you is the bottom of this popsicle stripe piece and the USA piece. I sent you with two detail brushes. That's what I used to paint the stripes. I highly recommend starting with white first, because if you get it over onto the side, that's okay. White is a lot easier to cover than red. So nothing amazing, just dip, take off most of the excess paint. This is a little bit harder to do while I'm holding it up so that the camera can see, but and then just follow that line. If you have higher quality brushes or paint markers, it makes these pieces easier, but whereas this is distressed, it works out great. And now I'm gonna set this aside. If you get some in the lines and that's gonna bother you, go ahead and take the toothpick that I included and run it along that line and it clears it out. Because these are distressed, I'm only doing one coat for the stripes, because otherwise, now if you want a crisp white, then go ahead and do multiple coats. But this will help cut down your sanding. So just make sure that the layer is even. While the paint is wet, I'm just gonna clear that out of the shiplap line. Okay, so I am going to press pause while I finish these white stripes, and then we'll come back for the next step. I totally got ahead of myself and I got in the zone and just started painting and forgot to come back and tell you. Once you're done painting your white stripes, wait until it's completely dry. Then you're gonna take your sandpaper and you want to lightly sand the white spots before you start painting the red. If you sand them at the same time, you're gonna get red paint it's going to transfer. So with your sandpaper, you can tear it into pieces if that's easier, or you can just use a corner for a different color, but you want one for white, one for red, and one for blue, and stick with that so that it doesn't transfer. So I just went ahead and I just did a light sanding. Since there was only one coat, it's not like a huge deal, I don't think. So take off as much as you want. I just quickly did the white. Now you get your other detail brush and then your red paint. And I just take a little bit more time with this because I don't want it to spill over to the white. I'm not gonna worry about it looking perfect, because again, I'm gonna distress it a little bit. But what I do is I dip my brush into the red paint. Then with the blob on there, I don't want to go right to the edge because then it's going to spill over. So kind of discard some of it in the middle and then move towards the edge now that you got most of it off. And I just drag mine along and then go back and kind of fill. Now, when I was painting the white, I was just going like this because I didn't really care if too much got over. But with the red color, since I do not want it to spill over, I'm gonna keep my brush facing this way, and I'm just gonna spend a little bit more time. Put on a Netflix show or something. I like to watch documentaries while I paint, because then I don't necessarily have to watch them. I can just listen. Hopefully you can see this okay. When you get to this one, it's a little bit easier because you can just go along the edge. Oh, I did what I told you don't do. Don't put it right by the stripe. Start in the middle and then move. Otherwise, you then have to move this little blob over. But then you can just kind of pull it off to the side, or off the edge. Okay, I will finish this off camera so you don't have to sit here and watch me patiently do these stripes. Oh, I do want to mention really quick, if you plan on doing a bunch of like tier tray kits, and you really like these little pieces, I do recommend, or heck, even the bigger piece, or the bigger projects, I do recommend getting some paint markers. It's just so much easier for these stripes. Instead of using this, you could basically just color in. You could honestly use a Crayola fine point marker if you wanted to. But like the paint markers have white, and so it's so nice to use them when you're adding highlights or just any fun little details. But I would only buy them if you're planning on doing a lot of kits. Otherwise, you're just kind of wasting your money. If you want recommendations on a brand, I recommended some several months ago, so I can send you a picture, so just let me know. Okay, I'm gonna finish this stripe and then come back on. Once your red is completely dry, you wanna make sure that there's no wet paint at all, otherwise it's just gonna spread back and forth. You're going to wanna take a clean corner of sandpaper, count that as your red piece. And then I already did this little section, but I'm going to show you how to do one of these pieces just because it's a little bit harder to get to and I wanna just give you a visual. So I'm just basically gonna stay away from the shiplap lines. I'm not gonna go right up to it because there's only one coat. It kind of already looks a little streaky and distressed to begin with. So I'm just gonna put my finger down and kind of stay towards the middle and just work however much you want to distress. You could just go one way if that gives you more control versus the back and forth. You don't have to worry about distressing the outsides because there's a frame that's gonna cover it. Once you've used up the corner with these stripes, if it was like other pieces, I honestly wouldn't worry about it. But with the stripes, since I don't want to transfer the red over to the white, I'm gonna peel that little piece off and then I'm gonna do the next stripe. And again, if you get a little bit of color transfer, it's totally fine. It's going to happen. I just wouldn't do the whole thing, otherwise it's gonna be red and pink stripe. And then I'm not gonna peel for this piece just because I have the edge there, so it makes it easier to control. And you can go ahead and distress however much or little you would like. Do the same thing with the popsicle piece. I already did that so that you didn't have to wait for me. Okay, now I'm going to set those off to the side and I'm gonna show you how to use the wedges just in case you have not done that before. I painted most of my blue pieces, but I wanna show you a large piece and then I'm gonna show you with the white so that I can show you the shiplap lines. So you're going to get your paint off to the side. This is my really messy paint mat. You are going to dip your wedge into that paint, dab the excess paint off onto the box. You don't want to deposit a ton of paint in one spot. And then you just dab up and down. Now, if this was any other piece, I would say do a very light coat once, then you can sand to knock down that wood grain if you want a really smooth coat, and then do another coat. But since we're distressing, I'm not going to do a heavy coat, but I'm also not doing a super light coat. So some of these, so you'll notice that I'm kind of going back and forth over some parts that I've already painted, just because you want to make sure that it's even. It doesn't have to look perfectly covered, but you do want it to be even. If it's super splotchy, when you distress it, it's going to look super splotchy still. So that's it. I'm going to count that good for the blue, and then repeat on all the other blue pieces. I'm just going to show you this little banner piece. Get more wedges for the white. Sorry, my phone keeps moving. Or maybe I'm the one that's moving it. I don't even know. I keep my head down when I'm painting, and then I just pray that it stays on camera. Okay, so white is kind of the same thing. With the shiplap pieces, I'm gonna go ahead and I need to rearrange my piece. I just dropped one piece. I'm just gonna go ahead and bounce even more white off because I don't wanna get it in the shiplap lines if possible. And then just very, very light touch over those lines. If you happen to get paint in, which you probably will, I'm looking around. Where did I put I moved things as I was packing boxes. So take your toothpick, and all you're gonna do is slide it along, and it pulls the paint out. And same thing, repeat. Now with the white, because the white is so much lighter, you may have to do 2 light coats on that. Sorry, I'm concentrating on getting all that paint out so my lines are nice and crisp. Like this, if you like how dark that is, then go ahead and leave it, and then you'll just distress over that. But I am going to do a second coat, a very light second coat on top. So go ahead and repeat that with all of the white pieces, and we'll come back to distress and put everything together. I tightened my camera tripod, so hopefully it will hold still. I forgot to mention that on these little pieces, that's what these blue tweezers are for. You just hold like the little piece so that you can bounce up and down and it doesn't attach to your wedge. So it makes it go very quickly. I'm gonna have to go back and watch the video. I hope that my camera didn't move so that you couldn't see what I was doing before when it was going back and forth. Okay, so once that's finished, wait until everything is completely dry. That still has a little bit. And then I'll show you on a couple of the pieces, and then I'm gonna finish distressing off camera. So again, I sent you with a couple pieces of sandpaper, so just make sure that you're using like a chunk for the white, a chunk for the red, and a chunk for the blue. I will show you on the blue. So if it's I'm gonna show you a big piece. Oh my gosh, let me spit out my words. So here's a big piece of the blue. I'm not even gonna press that hard because I just wanna go over it pretty lightly just to see what comes up first. Then I'm gonna go over it a little bit harder and focus more pressure on the edges. And then just do however much you want distressed. If that's not enough, go ahead and do a second pass. This is 100% personalizable. If you want it very heavy, just keep sanding. But if you take too much off, you have to go back and repaint, and that's no fun. Now I'm gonna show you the little pieces. This isn't a super small piece. I'll do it with the red. Let me get a different chunk of sandpaper. I'm just gonna Let's do it with the star. It's really hard to hold the star down and sand it. So what I do is I keep my sandpaper down, take my star, and I just press it back and forth. And that is a perfect distressed star. Technically, I guess you could do that with the bigger pieces, but that would take more energy. So anyways, go ahead and finish distressing your pieces. Be super careful distressing with these kinds of pieces because they are fragile. So if you just start ripping the sandpaper back and forth, it is going to break your piece. So just be really careful. This one, I would do the same thing. I would just put it down on the sandpaper and just very gently go back and forth. I'm gonna finish distressing everything and then we will put them together. Okay, when you have all the pieces painted, I went ahead and I laid everything out. It's not stuck on. I just laid them out so I made sure I know where things go. There's several stars. The 3 smallest stars go on this round piece. So you want to make sure that it fits in the etching. Then there's 2 medium-sized stars. Those go on the tag. Make sure that it fits there. And then the larger stars go on your banner. So before I'm going to stick these down, you can see on my pictured piece, I just went ahead and added some polka dots just to add an extra dimension. You absolutely do not need to. You could just have them like that. But if you wanted polka dots, take the toothpick that I included and there's a flat end and you are just going to dip that into the white paint. And then I just went ahead, my white paint, I dipped it in some paint that started to dry because mine is not covered up. I thought it was still wet enough though. But anyways, so just dot, just random. It doesn't have to look perfect. It just gives it a little bit more dimension, or interest, I should say. And if you have a paint pen, this is like a great use for it. I don't know why I did the corners because you're not going to be able to see once that's on there. But anyways, I'm going to set those aside to dry. I think everyone who ordered this has done kits before, but just in case, every piece has some 3M, which is commercial grade adhesive, on the back. So you're going to peel that protective layer off, line it up with the etching, make sure that it's covered on all ends, and then once you press down, it is stuck there. I'll go with the next piece. My tweezers are getting a little bit dull. Oh. Make sure that all the edge is covered and then press down. So I'm going to repeat this with all of my pieces. I'm looking to see if there's anything out of the ordinary until we get to the tag to make the tassel. Okay, also I wanted to mention with these stars, they might look symmetrical, but there is a top and a bottom. So these are still kind of wet. So before you press down, I would highly recommend making sure you know which way will make it fit perfectly and not have the edges misaligned. So make sure that you know where it's going, and then I would just lay them out side by side the correct way and then press down. If that makes sense. Let me know if it does not. We will be back to do the tag. To make your tassel and beads, you have 3 different sizes of twine. One is a thicker, super long, It's 8 or 9 feet long piece. And then you have 2 thin pieces. To start with, you need the thicker. So I'm gonna set that on my lap. And then the smallest of the 2 twines. So set that middle one off to the side for a minute. And I'm gonna just set that small piece down. So we're gonna make our tassel. So I'm going to, oh, I just absorbed that small piece. Mine knotted up, so I wanna make sure that it's not gonna do that. Okay, so take the end, and I just kind of have it hanging off to the side. I spread my fingers because my hands are smaller. You don't have to do that. I just want kind of a longer tassel. If my fingers are closer together, then it's just gonna be a shorter tassel. And then you just wrap all the way around. And then once I move my hands out, you have this loop. I like to put my pinky in there. I kind of try to keep these end pieces even, so if you might have to kind of fidget around a little bit, because that's the end of the tassel. So if you have a piece clear up here, if that's gonna bug you, then you're gonna wanna unwrap it and then just cut off that extra piece, if that makes sense. So I put my pinky in to keep like the head of the tassel smaller, and then move my pinky out so I can still kind of see that eye. Take this smaller string that you had set down, and I'm going to leave a tail so that I have something to tie it with. And I'm just gonna start wrapping around a few times. It doesn't really matter how many, as long as you have enough to then tie a super tight knot so that it doesn't unravel. Sorry, my puppy is barking at my old dog that does not want to play. Then get a pencil or a pen or the end of your paintbrush or whatever, and just make sure that you can see that eye. You may not even need to do this, but you want to make sure that you can see that hole, because now, first, almost forgot, we're gonna make the tassel by cutting through the bottom of our loop, just like that. And then I like to kind of lay it all down and then just even it up just a little bit. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I just like to make it a little bit neater. Okay, now make sure that you have that eye, and then get that twine that you had set aside. And I'm going to thread that through and then tie into a knot on top of that tassel. Okay, so this is what you're left with. The 2 long pieces, not of this string, but of the wraparound, I always trim those. Make sure that you don't trim super close to the knot, otherwise it's going to unravel. But it drives me nuts because it's not gonna lay flat, and so I don't want them to be. Okay, if it seems there's a little glitch, it's because I got a phone call and it kicked me off the video. You might not have a problem with this twine. I switched to a different twine to see if it would help with the fraying, but just in case, I want to show you the steps. So you may or may not need this. Get a small piece of Scotch tape. This is actually way too big, so I'm just going to cut a little piece, and I'm just going to wrap it around that edge, because that's going to help guide it through the beads, but also prevent it from fraying and making you super frustrated. Okay, so imagine my tag is going to be right here. So for my tag, I want the pattern to be red, white, blue. So I'm gonna go backwards and do blue first, if that makes sense. It doesn't really matter. I cannot remember the pattern I did in the pictures. I don't know if I did 2 reds, 2 whites, 2 blues, or if I did just red, white, blue, red, white, blue. But for this one, I'm gonna do 2 and 2. You do whatever pattern you want to do. And then I'm gonna go back with 2 blue. I'm curious what I did. I don't even know. Okay, so now this is what it's going to look like. Okay, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to here, and this little piece, you can, so this is the piece that's on with the tassel, you can either cut it closer to the knot, or you can go ahead and thread it up through the remainder beads, which is generally what I do, because I always am afraid that if you cut, it could unravel the knot potentially, but you do whatever you want. Okay, now to secure the tag. Press, you don't have to press super hard, but firmly. You want all the beads to firmly go to the end of the tassel. You don't want these big, huge gaps. Then I'm going, my goodness, another phone call. So sorry. Okay, so once you press all the beads firmly towards the tassel, you are going to take your tag and thread up through the back of the tag, and then just make sure that the tag is close to those beads. Then you're going to take that end and you're going to thread. I'm going to make a gap so that you can see you will not have this gap. You're going to thread behind this thread and in between the tag and the beads. Now I'm going to tighten it a little bit, so, and then this creates this loop right here, and you're going to go through that loop and then pull tight. And then you're gonna repeat that process to create a knot. So thread underneath everything, but make sure that you are between that bead and the tag. Create that loop, go through the loop, and pull to create that knot. And then I like to thread up through at least a few beads before I trim. I send you with more twine than you need, just in case you want to add more beads or make it your own somehow else. I'm just going to go up through a handful. And then I'm just going to trim that. Make sure that you're only trimming this and not the twine. Otherwise your tassel is falling apart. And that's it. You have your fun little tag to add to your tier tray. Let me know if there's any step that you need me to go over in more depth, or if you have any questions you want me to film it in like a different perspective. Maybe you would rather see it on the side. Just let me know and I'm happy to help however I can.